Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I'm seeking the Green Party nomination for president, and with me is my running mate for vice president, Angela Walker. And
Everybody.
I thought we'd start out with a few words about what's been going on this week. I can't remember if last week I talked about how the COVID pandemic has shown for everybody how the two governing parties in this country are presiding over a failed state. With 4% of the world's population, we have 30% of the infections and the deaths. Trump is incompetent. Biden is invisible. It's an opportunity for us to point in the direction of where we need to go. There's a political vacuum there, and it's time for the Green Party and Independent Party on the left to step up and provide some real solutions to the problems we face, not just COVID, but the climate meltdown, inequality, militarism, and the new nuclear arms race. And what has been revealed this week for people that maybe weren't paying attention before is that this state has failed Black America since its founding, since this country was organized. And so what we're talking about is this has got to be a sustained movement, not just a few protests, then people go home and say, oh, they didn't do anything. It's not up to them, it's up to us. Right now, people are crying out about the injustice. No justice, no peace. But it's time for us to tell not just the people running the country what we want, but for us to take the power and get what we want. What we got to do is not settle for little reforms to the policing we got. Like there's an Eric Garner law that Hakeem Jeffries is going to move into Congress that would make chokeholds illegal across the country, which they already are in a lot of jurisdictions, although the police don't always follow that. And that's a good reform, but that's not nearly enough. What we really got to change is who's got the power. What we got now is the police policing themselves. So when they do something wrong, it's in internal affairs and they cover it up most cases. And when the criminal justice system gets involved, they rarely prosecute and even more rarely get a prosecution. Even when we got it on videotape, like the case of Eric Garner down there in Staten Island. So we're talking about, we think one demand that we got to begin putting forward is community control of the police, elected police commissions. This is not community policing. This is not review boards, which haven't worked. This is where we elect the police commission. They hire and fire the police chief. They investigate independently and sanction independently police misconduct. And they work for us. What we got now is police unions. They got a lot of power. The politicians are afraid of them, politically at least, sometimes physically, I believe. And so they just defer to self-policing of the police for their misconduct, which obviously hasn't worked. That to me is a game changer. We've also been calling for a Johnny Gamage law, which would require federal investigation and, when warranted, prosecution whenever a human being's civil rights are violated, including bodily injury and death. And it's named after Johnny Gamage, who was suffocated to death in 1995. He happens to be from the neighborhood I'm sitting in right now. And he was visiting his cousin, who was a football player with the Pittsburgh Steelers named Ray Seals. And he was suffocated to death by suburban Pittsburgh police, who were never convicted of anything and got promotions after that killing. And then I think when we look out at this movement, one thing that has struck me is that most of the provocations I've seen of the police and, you know, the tagging of buildings has been done by young white people. They have a right to be outraged. I mean, their generation has been screwed economically, but they're going into Black communities and imposing tactics that was not what the demonstration was about. And it's really a form of white privilege and arrogance. And so what we got to do as a movement is build relationships with the people in those communities. And if we want to talk about community control, first, you know, they got to know who we are, or why should they listen to us? And we should respect, you know, the way they want to go out and do their demonstrations. I was really moved yesterday by Terrence Floyd, George's brother, urging people not to come into his community and burn it down. That's not what he wants. And I think, you know, if we can't respect that, we're not respecting anybody. So, but underlying a lot of this anger, both the Black and the white youth, who are the most people out there, is the economic hardship people are facing. So we also need to put forward our economic justice demands. We have an economic bill of rights, so everybody has a right to a job, an income above poverty, affordable housing, comprehensive health care, lifelong tuition-free public education, and a secure retirement. And that needs to be part of this too. So I guess I'm saying, one, if you're involved, respect the indigenous Black leadership in these communities, work with them, don't impose tactics on them. And two, this has got to be sustained. And three, we're not making demands on the power structure so much as we're saying we got to take the power. And particularly with policing, make the police protect and serve us, not themselves. So I got that off my chest. Angela, you want to add anything before we take questions?
I think you pretty much said most of what I need to say. And I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that there is still a pandemic overarching all of these things that are happening right now. So we're dealing with pain on the level of the loss of Mr. Floyd and so many other people. And we've been getting a lot of folks asking if we've spoken out about that. If y'all go to the website under campaign updates, we have made numerous statements, and there are more coming around what we're dealing with, you know, with the uprisings and the reasons for those uprisings. And so one of the things that I just want folks to be is safe. I understand that there is a lot going on. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of pain. But let's take care of each other. Let's work with the leadership that is in place where we are moving. And let's be safe as we possibly can. Mask up if you can, you know, make sure that y'all are eating, make sure you are staying hydrated. I know that, you know, police across the country are illegally using tear gas on a lot of people. There were young people, young queer folks that were tear gassed in Kalamazoo. So I need y'all to, you know, if there are trainings offered, you know, impromptu trainings so that, you know, y'all are going forth prepared, please take them and just take care of each other and self-care. Make sure y'all are doing things for yourself to decompress with all of this, because this is a lot to hold.
Okay, so first question. What can be done about Rhode Island's Green Party's decision not to run a presidential candidate in that state? We can petition to put ourselves on the ballot independently. It's 1,000 signatures. They're due September 4th. We are planning to do that. And it's up to the people in Rhode Island what party label they want to use. But we will be on the ballot in Rhode Island. And, you know, I am disappointed that the Rhode Island Green Party decided to surrender instead of fight. And it's even all the more disappointing in that they're in a safe state. I mean, Trump ain't going to win Rhode Island. So, you know, if they're worried about alienating their Biden friends, I don't think they have a realistic assessment of the situation. But whatever, regardless of what they decided, we will be on the ballot in Rhode Island.
Hey, Chris Campbell is asking us, do you think sex work should be safe and legal? Absolutely. Sex work is work. We favor decriminalization under the New Zealand model. We believe that sex workers deserve the same rights, the same respect, the same protections, the same right to unionize as any other worker. You got some more on that?
Well, just to explain the New Zealand model as opposed to the Nordic model, in Sweden, they let sex workers go free, but they prosecute the people that pay for the sex, which actually puts the sex workers in legal jeopardy or has the police snooping around. And it hasn't helped the sex workers. In New Zealand, both sides of the transaction are free as long as it's between consenting adults. They still prosecute, of course, sex trafficking, underage, and so forth. El Duran asks, what type of legislation would you pass for the next time a pandemic happens, particularly in the start when there's only a handful of cases? Well, even before the start, we should have our public health infrastructure developed. And that's both the programs that Trump shut down in the National Security Council and at the Center for Disease Control. It also means a public health system. I mean, a publicly owned health system, Medicare for all as a community controlled national health service. So without profit for providers and insurers being the motive, you would have backup, knowing that in the case of a pandemic, you need that personal protective equipment. You need other medical equipment. And you have the infrastructure to do what should happen when a pandemic breaks out, and that is to test, trace, and isolate the infected. All the countries of the Pacific Rim are doing this. Their infection rates are much lower than ours. It is not rocket science. We have people who know how to do it, and Trump doesn't do it. And, you know, why isn't Biden out there saying, test, trace, isolate, damn it? I mean, he's got the stage. And so there's not a clear direction from the Democrats against Trump, and Trump is incompetent and indifferent. And that's why I say we're in a failed state. So I think those are the things. We got to be prepared. We got to be on the lookout. And then if a pandemic does break out, we isolate the infections and prevent them from spreading.
Croissant is asking, hello, Howie and Angela. My question is, should hate speech be illegal? It's a good one. You want to take that first?
Yeah, I don't want to give the state any power to control speech because they'll suppress us. But private institutions, they don't have to tolerate hate speech. And hate speech, if it's attached to another crime, becomes a hate crime. So there's a way of sanctioning hate speech when it leads to action. And the other thing to do about hate speech is counter it. But don't leave it to the state, because the state, depending on who's governing it, is going to go after people like us. You know, they'll call affirmative action hate speech, reverse discrimination. I mean, nonsense like that. Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay, Lori from Cambria, California. What will be your first action to begin the strategy of building a Green New Deal? Have an executive order declaring a climate emergency, which gives the president extra powers. And I would organize an Office of Climate Mobilization to coordinate all climate protection actions through the federal government. And then I go to Congress with a bill to implement our eco-socialist Green New Deal budget. And to the extent we can get that through Congress, there's Office of Climate Mobilization, analogous to the Office of War Mobilization in World War II, which took over a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country to turn industry on a dime into the arsenal of democracy, to arm the allies against the Nazis. We do the same sort of thing to defeat climate change. But the first thing would be to declare a climate emergency and increase the powers of the president to take the actions that can be immediately taken. And there's a whole range of them. And I actually have a, somewhere on my website, a statement I made probably last summer about all the things the president can do now. And I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but there's a lot of them. And, you know, it's everything from rolling back the rollbacks of EPA protections that President Trump has tried to institute, ending the oil and gas drilling on public lands. There's a whole range of things that can be done right away.
Lauren Harris is asking, are you in favor of getting rid of for-profit prisons and demilitarizing police? Yes, we are. That's the short answer. I mean, you think about the fact that mass incarceration in this country is directly related to the fact that prisons make money off of the people who are incarcerated in them. And if you've only got, you're not locking people up, you're not making any money. In Milwaukee years ago, when I was with Occupy the Hood, there was a bill that they tried to sneak through, a Senate bill, SB 207. And what that would have done was turn things that were currently misdemeanors into felonies. Because, once you're labeled a felon, that's a label that, stays with people. It hinders their ability to move through society the way that they need to. And so we held, our state wouldn't give us a hearing on it. And so we held a people's hearing at my union hall and took that information to the state, and the people pushed that bill back. So, but things like that are directly related to feeding people into prisons. And a lot of people don't even know that those things are happening, or that, things that used to be classified as misdemeanors are now felonies for the reason you're feeding the system. So, yeah. And there was something that just came across the table, I think yesterday, Howie. There's a state that wants to, and I can't remember the state, stop taking military giveaways for their police force.
Yeah, that's been a controversy. There's a military program where surplus military equipment is given to police forces. And I know, like here in Syracuse, they got a troop carrier, and somebody on city council said, well, what do we need that for? And the police said, well, it's free. It's not going to cost the city anything. So the councilor shrugged. But that's the problem. They are militarizing police. And when police should be people that are peacekeepers, they are peace officers. They are not an occupying military force. And too often, a lot of these guys have, they're veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, and their attitude going into a community they don't live in, same attitude they had, and I think it's a similar mission as to what they were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, searching for bad guys. I think an example of how we can change police culture and practices is Richmond, California, under the Green Mayor, Gail McLaughlin, and the police chief she hired, Chris Magnus, between 2006 and 2014. Magnus told the officers, you're no longer going to be promoted based on tickets written and arrests made, but on the relationships you build and the problems you solve on the community policing beats. You're all going to walk now. And a lot of those officers who thought they wanted to do what they were doing in Richmond, the same thing they had done in Iraq, say, quit. And Magnus was able to hire a whole new police force, a lot of new officers, and under this new policy. And so they went from, it's a city of 80% people of color with one of the highest murder rates in the country. They went from 20% people of color on the force to 60%. They did things like let police officers live in public housing for free. The city paid the rent. And now the police union head lives in public housing. I think that may be the only place in the country. So they live in the community. And coupled to the community policing approach, the problem solving approach, the de-escalation approach, was fighting poverty and giving opportunity, particularly to the young gang members that were the shooters. They were trying to get them to stop. And Angela ran for sheriff of Milwaukee against a crazy man that said, don't call 911, get a gun. That was the sheriff, David Clark, crazy Trumpite. And her program was basically fight crime by fighting poverty. And so what they did in Richmond is they offered these young people that were at risk, in trouble, jobs. If they stayed out of trouble, they got a philanthropist to give them $1,000 a month for a while. Offered them counseling, drug treatment, the kind of services they needed. And as a result of that, the number of murders went from 44 the year the program started to 7. And I think that's an example of a police force that was set up to serve the people and protect them. And it had good results. Property crimes went down as well. It wasn't done with community control, but they did have an independent investigative force in the city hall, not within the police department internal affairs, which told the officers, you know, you're going to be accountable for misconduct. So they had no police shootings until there was an incident the last year in a nearby city called Vallejo, which is similar demographically. They had 6 residents shot by the police. So that's just for comparison. So we can do better. And the Richmond example, I think, is the best example I know of. And it was a Green mayor that got it done. Okay, I guess my
That's you.
Yeah, Poppy Davis asks, my question is, how immediate do you feel the threat of climate collapse is? What is your personal opinion? Well, I go by the climate science, and I've been reading people like James Hansen in this country, David Anderson in England, groups in Germany, in Australia, and they've been saying since, you know, late 2000s, in other words, 2008, 9, that basically rich countries like the United States have to cut their greenhouse gas emissions 10% per year, which back then, when I first and was the first candidate in this country to call for a Green New Deal, we said we got to get to 100% clean energy and 0 to negative carbon emissions in 10 years, 2020. Well, we're there now. It's going to take some time. So now our goal is 2030. And if you look at the carbon budgets, we can still have a significant impact in mitigating the change that's already baked into the system. The threat is real. And what it means is not just heat waves and stronger storms. It means mass extinctions, leading to ecosystem collapse, leading to agricultural collapse. So that people like Kevin Anderson have done projections. If we go on a business as usual scenario, the destruction of agriculture, they estimate, will reduce the carrying capacity of, or the number of people that can be fed by 90% by the year 2100. That is an apocalypse. And that's how serious it is. And we're already into it. I mean, there's ocean level rise. There is planetary heating of the atmosphere baked into the system from the carbon and other greenhouse gases we've already released. What we got to do is not only zero out release, we got to draw carbon out of the atmosphere, which is where we come to organic agriculture, rebuild soils, a big civilian conservation corps to reforest a lot of areas, to rehabilitate habitat that's carbon intensive, like wetlands and mangroves. And if that is done to the full capacity, according to James Hansen, by 2100, we can get carbon in the atmosphere back down below 350 parts per million. And that's really, and that's the most optimistic estimate of what we can do with what so-called natural sequestration is. So, you know, we got to move right now, and that's why it's a crisis. And Joe Biden, I'll just say this. I mean, Trump calls climate change a hoax. The Democrats act as if it's a hoax, and especially Joe Biden. His climate program relies on carbon sequestration of burning fossil fuels and expanding nuclear power, which is a whole waste of money. We can build a lot more electric generation with wind and solar than what we would invest in nuclear power plants, which are always taking longer to build than they say, cost more than they project, and then when they're operating are a constant danger of catastrophic accidents. They do leak radiation and all the waste they produce. I mean, why make things worse? And it's an industry that has not been successful. I mean, right here in New York, Exelon in Chicago owns the 4 nukes upstate. They were ready to shut them down because they weren't making money. And a Democrat, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, got through the Public Service Commission an increase in rates for ratepayers to pay Exelon $8 billion over the next 8 or 10 years, I forget the number of years, to keep those plants open so we could say he has carbon-free energy production. So it's an economic disaster as well.
Jules in Northwood, Ohio. For the last 3 presidentials, I voted for nominees Ralph Nader and twice for Dr. Jill Stein. If the ultimate goal is to unseat Donald Trump, is voting third party counterproductive? I would very gently push back that our goal is bigger than unseating Donald Trump. I think that there is a lot of urgency around removing him from office, but at the end of the day, the system that he represents goes much deeper than that. And like somebody on Twitter really put it really well today. They were like, they're two parties, yes, but they're actually just one. And I agree with that. And I think that people have to realize that Donald Trump is the symptom of a sick system. He is not the disease itself. And so I think that what we are calling for, yes, we need, I can agree with a need immediately for a whole lot of people to have harm reduction, but at the end of the day, you're just kicking the can down the road. And we are still going to be dealing with a system that kills people. We are still dealing with a capitalist system that puts profit before people. Those folks on the other side, Biden, they are not going to address that because it is not politically expedient for them. They're not going to go against the system that feeds them. And so, first off, the people that are going to support us a whole lot of them are people who are not going to go out and weren't going to go out and vote. And I know this because they tell us. And I think Howie is a little, you have a way that you say this that's like way more succinct than I do. And I'm going to go around the world trying to say it, but you know where I'm going with that. So I'm going to, why people should go first.
Yeah, Trump is a total disaster, but Biden has no solutions. Whether we're talking about police brutality, the COVID pandemic, climates, inequality, the nuclear arms race. I don't think he said a word about that. And the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist says the doomsday clock, the closest it's ever been to midnight. And I think Angela put it well. We're out here to unseat the capitalist system. We want a socialist economic democracy where we have the power to choose our technologies and make sure we can meet everybody's basic needs within ecological limits. And to put it on us to elect Biden, that's not our job. We're pointing to an alternative. Biden has billions of dollars. We're going to be lucky if we get a few $100,000. We're going to get a few $100,000, but that's 1/1000th of billions. Is that right? Yeah. No, it's 1 million is 1,000th of a billion. So we're tiny compared to him, and everybody's coming to us and saying, you got to stand down so Biden can win. Look, Trump should be toast. He's totally botched the coronavirus thing. Now he's out there fanning the flames of civil unrest for everybody to see. And the economy is in a depression, and both parties have this unwarranted, dogmatic faith that private enterprise alone is going to get us out of this economic depression we're in. There are no solutions there. And so Trump should be crushed, should be a landslide for Biden. And we just want to get enough votes to get ballot lines and get enough votes to have leverage in the debate as we go forward beyond the election. And if Biden can't beat Trump in these circumstances, with a depression, a pandemic, he can't do anything. The Democrats can't do anything. And for us to rely on them to fight the right, Angela said that Trump is a symptom of the system. And I would say that system is neoliberal capitalism, with both the Republicans and the Democrats are agreed on. And that has created the anger that helped elect Trump from people that voted for him because they want to shake things up. But I think I got a demonstration outside. Yeah, I do. Hold on a sec.
That's pretty dope. I live in Florence, South Carolina. They're not getting it on around here. I'm also trying to think there was something I was about to say also.
Yeah, that's a demonstration against police brutality. They are just marching down this neighborhood.
Yes.
And they are very young. They are high school and maybe just out of high school age. So yeah, that's what's been going on in Syracuse. It's spontaneous and it's young. And these look like mostly kids from the neighborhood, Black people, Puerto Ricans, a few whites. So yeah, this is going on.
And the thing I just remember, because when you walked away, I was like, what did I want to say? The thing I want to say is, or just ask people, because what I get a lot of, and I'm seeing it in the comments too, where people are like, I'm afraid, or I can't, y'all aren't going to do this or whatever. First off, I believe that it's possible. I believe that in a year, we are seeing the impossible. If you had told anybody 2 years ago that 2020 would have come down like it's coming down, you wouldn't have believed it yourself. But here we are. 10 years ago, if someone would have told you that a buffoon like Donald Trump, notorious buffoon, would be run for president and actually win, you wouldn't have believed it. So if we can wrap our minds around the feasibility of really bad things happening, why can't we imagine forward about what we want? Why does that only feel aspirational? I am personally in this because I feel that this is possible. I feel that this platform is something I don't have to hold my nose to vote for. I don't have to hold my nose to support it. I can support this in the name of my grandkids, and I do. And so for, folks who are like, you're not going to do it, or we're going to do it anyway. Had to get it off my.
Is it my turn?
Probably.
Okay, I think you pronounce that George, or?
I think so.
Okay, George, how would you deal with the violent history of the U.S. against people in the world since founding? Well, we have a foreign policy of diplomacy to support democracy and human rights. Instead of being the world's global military empire, we should use our resources to be the world's humanitarian superpower, a global Green New Deal, help the global South leap out of the 19th century fossil fuel age into the 21st century solar age. Without much money, a fraction of our current military budget, we could provide everybody in the world with basic medical care, elementary education, and running water and sewage so that the water is clean. There's a UN World Development Budget, and last time I looked at it, it was like 5% of the US military budget would cover the whole UN development budget. So we're calling for 75% cut in military spending, bringing our troops home from the 7 shooting wars we're in, stop these covert operations in over 100 countries a year, start withdrawing our forces from over 800 foreign military bases, and pledge no first use of nuclear weapons, disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, and then go to the other nuclear powers after doing those tension reducing initiatives and say, we want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. And I think we'd have the nations of the world with us. 122 of them agreed to the text of a treaty on the abolition of nuclear weapons in July 2017, 3 years ago. The international campaign for the abolition of nuclear weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in this country knows it. None of the major party presidential candidates have talked about this. It's not an issue. And one thing we're trying to do with our campaign, and we hope Greens up and down the ticket will put this into debate, because as I mentioned, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has the doomsday clock closer ever to midnight, because we're modernizing our nuclear forces, super hypersonic strategic nukes, tactical nukes in our conventional forces, with a military doctrine that we can use them to escalate and then de-escalate, which isn't going to happen. That's crazy. So that's, I think, the approach we need to take. And, we should make friends instead of enemies around the world. Hey, you want me to ask one of these kids to come in and tell us what they're doing?
That would be dope.
Okay, there's a couple by the door. Let me see who's there.
That's so dope. Oh my God. Philip Matthews, if neither of you are allowed to participate in the main debate, would you debate Joe Jorgensen, Libertarian nominee for president? Luckily, I am not running for president, so I will wait till the president comes back and we'll ask him that. But Howie's smart enough to basically debate anybody. I'm not worried about that. So. Joshua Elliott James, are we trying to reform the U.S. or dismantle it as peacefully as possible? There was a question that came up about you debating, possibly debating Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian nominee for president, if you would be willing to do it, if you were asked.
Yeah, it depends on who's hosting it. You know, if some people were listening, you know, I wouldn't want to do it in Biden's basement, for example. You know what I mean? I think all the candidates should be willing to debate each other, particularly those of us like the Greens, the Libertarians, the Democrats, and Republicans who have enough ballot lines to have enough electoral votes to win the presidency. That seems to me to be a reasonable criterion. It shows you got a serious campaign and you got something out there. I'll just say they stepped off just as I went out there. It's 37 minutes past curfew in this city. These kids are really young. They look to me high school. And the police will give them an escort, I think just so they weren't blocking traffic. I don't think there's going to be a problem. The problems we've had in Syracuse were basically some white kids from the suburbs, you know, breaking windows and diverting the police, and then some of the people in the city use that as an opportunity to loot downtown. And actually, they didn't discriminate. They went after black-owned business, immigrant-owned business, as well as white-owned business, and that was unfortunate. And it, you know, some people want to blame the people protesting police brutality on that looting, which is unfair. But anyway, so we moved on.
Okay, and yeah, this is Joshua Elliott James that came after the question I just asked you. Are we trying to reform the U.S. or dismantle it as peacefully as possible?
Well, you can get in semantics on that. We want fundamental change, structural change, change in the power. We want more democracy. Democracy is revolutionary. Go back and read the Communist Manifesto. What did Marx and Engels say? We got to win the battle for democracy. And they were basically talking about the vote. And when the workers, they didn't have the vote back then, got the vote, they could really exert political power. And although whether that would come peacefully and the people in power would let them just legislate a transformation, Marx and Engels were very skeptical. And history shows there's good reason to be skeptical. Think of Chile in the early 70s, where, you know, it was a coalition government. The leader, Allende, was a socialist. And they did nationalize a few companies and provide more social programs, but that was too much for Anaconda Copper and what was it, ITT back then, which got the CIA to mess around and back a coup by the, you know, the right-wing forces in the military. So, you know, we'll see where that goes. But, you know, reform or revolution, it's really, reform or reformism is you're going to make the system we got work better. And for some, it's you gradually piecemeal, you change the system gradually from capitalism to socialism. I think in reality, once you get some structural reforms, you got to push forward fast or they're going to get rolled back as long as the billionaire class still has the power. So for example, the difference between me and us and Bernie Sanders is he wanted to tax the billionaire class to fund social programs, good programs like Medicare for all and college for all. The problem was he didn't expropriate the billionaires as the owners of most of our productive assets or means of production. So they kept the power. That economic power translates into political power. If you don't deal with that, you're not going to be able to gradually make all the reforms. So it's really about transferring the power in a democratic way to the people. The working majority are, you know, they're the majority. So they will legislate in the interests of the majority. And hopefully that will be as peaceful as possible. But you can't count on them not doing something like they did in Chile. My turn?
It is.
Okay, Vanessa Sans Kudabak. What is your position on how to best support educators and students, particularly during the COVID pandemic? That's a good question. You want to take the first crack, Angela, or you want me to go?
I feel like you're on a roll with it. So
All right.
I'll go after
Well, I've actually wanted to, it's been so busy between, Sanders bowing out of the campaign, a lot of people coming in, the COVID pandemic, and now this police brutality and the uprising we're seeing around the country, that I haven't had time to think about it, but I do have some concerns. I'm afraid under the cover of the COVID pandemic, the forces that are pushing privatization are going to push harder. They're going to push harder the technology, online learning, and with the idea of substituting that for classroom learning. On the other side, I'm concerned about the public health ramifications of bringing kids back into schools before we got a contact, trace, and isolate program in place, and that's not even in sight. So I guess I've identified the things we got to think through, and but I don't have a worked out program yet. But I think those are some of the considerations. In terms of education generally, we got to have equitable funding. Federal government through the progressive income tax should fund public schools. It should not be dependent on local property taxes because property taxes are unevenly distributed, and that gives us the inequitable resources that school districts have. We got to push back privatization. Charter schools are a scam. They drain resources out of public schools. If you want to innovate, you can do that within the public school framework. We elect our school boards. We can make that happen. Don't let these private companies come in, even if they're so-called nonprofits, they contract with for-profits, often owned by the same people. So, don't get fooled by that game. And it ends up costing more. We got to pay for the overhead for a school district. Then we got to pay for the students that go to the charters. If the students don't perform well and the charters want to get good test scores, they send the students back to the public schools. There's so much wrong with that. And we can't reduce student achievement to these standardized tests because there are other things people learn in school, like how to work as a team, how to be creative, how to be a critical thinker. And those tests don't test for those things. So you need human beings evaluate and helping the students beyond these tests, which have limited diagnostic help for certain things like math. They're pretty good at determining what kind of math you know, but they don't say what your capacity is or what your interest is. They just say what you know now and can spit back on a test. But you can use that to figure out what they don't know. Instead of using it for evaluation, these tests are used to rank schools, rank students, track them into either college prep or vocational tracks, define schools as failed because they're scoring low, as poor schools, and it's usually poor students economically that score low because they've had less opportunity. They aren't as familiar with the stuff in the material, so it just reproduces inequality. I mean, all that's got to change. So we need equitable funding. We got to get away from this high stakes testing and privatization. And then beyond and before K to 12, we need public childcare and pre-K free for children to go to. And we need post-secondary education at public institutions, college, trade school, technical school, lifelong adult education, or continuing education. That should be tuition free at public institutions. So that we know. How to deal with it in this pandemic crisis is something that we need to think carefully about, I believe.
Shochipili, 69. I would like to ask your feelings on the immigration. How could we fix this broken system? I think that it is essential to go to the root of it. And I think that the United States destabilizing economies and elections in Central and South America and Mexico, you're displacing people, and people go where there's work. Migration is a human right. So first off, immigration itself is not a problem. And yes, Kai, we are for open borders. We absolutely are. Yeah, it's my take on it. Howie, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, open borders like they have within the EU. You know, you check in at the border. If there's not a warrant out for your arrest, go about your business. Come in and have a vacation. Come in to work. Come in to reside. Come in to shop, and be able to go back across. And I think it'll work out great. People say, "Oh, all the people in Mexico and Central America come flooding up here." I don't think so. People want to stay in their communities. They have family, they have connections, they have property. Look at Greece. Greece is flat on its back, and all the Greeks could go running up to Germany or one of the more affluent countries, you know, since the Great Recession, and they have not. I mean, sometimes family members go up there, they send money back to Greece, just like Mexicans and Central Americans who work here send stuff, money back to their families, back where they came from. People that do immigrate tend to be the more ambitious people that, you know, they've got an idea for an education, they want to get a profession, or they want to be a scientist, or they want to start a business, and they really add to our country. So, you know, those people should be welcome. And I would say right now, what we need to do right now is release all the detainees because they're sitting ducks for the coronavirus. We need to reunite the families. The Trump administration is still splitting up families, and children are being, you know, it's a crime against humanity. I think there are probably charges we could bring if we were the president and looked at some of the laws they violated on the treatment of children. There are people in this administration that are responsible and should be held accountable. And also, they won't let immigrants in to go through the process. They got to camp out on the Mexican side of the wall. Those people should be let in. And then when we do let them into the country, given the circumstances they're in, we should provide social services, help them find housing, particularly those young people who are underage and unaccompanied, and you know, other social services. So, excuse me, and particularly in this coronavirus pandemic, they should be able to get on Medicaid right now because that's a public health issue. They should, and to deny them access to those services is just to make it harder to provide the proper public health message measures. So those are some of my thoughts on immigration.
Santino, oh, you got it or I got it? I can't remember who read the last one.
I think you did the last one. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think you did. Okay, Santino from Pittston, Pennsylvania. Would you consider a spot for Bernie Sanders in your cabinet? And also thank you, Howie and Angela, for inspiring me to register with the Green Party. Well, welcome, Santino. I did make a statement when I was asked by one of these podcasters if I had anything to say to Bernie Sanders when he was still in the race. Although I think it was after Super Tuesday when he was, it wasn't looking so good for him. And my message to Sanders through that podcast was, if you want to break with the Democrats and join the Green Party, we should talk. Never happened. I didn't think it would. But when I thought about it, I thought, well, if Sanders wanted to work with us, you know, would I put him on a ticket? And I think, no, I don't need to do that. I mean, I wanted to put Angela Walker on anyway at that time. But Bernie's got his own platform. If he wanted to work with us, he'd be a super surrogate. And he wouldn't need a title. We could just send him out there to talk if he was for the program. Unfortunately, he's going to back Biden for better or worse, and he's already compromising. I like Bernie. I've had my differences over the years, but I was really disappointed when a few weeks ago he said he's ready to compromise on Medicare for all and agree that he would live with expanding it to 55 and older and children, and in between we'd have a public option to buy into Medicare. That's basically the public option. The public option costs more than Medicare for all. And I was screaming at the TV during those debates, you know, at Bernie and also Elizabeth Warren, when they, you know, were talking to you about the cost of Medicare for all. You should have shouted back, your damn public option costs more than Medicare for all. And they never put them on the defense. They were defending themselves without pointing out that, hey, we're talking about saving money. Anyway, so you want to add anything, Angela?
I have feelings. I It's one thing to bow out of a race. It is another thing to ask your folks who support your specific platform, your specific values, to hand them over to somebody that has nothing to do with anything you said you wanted to do. I got a problem with that. It's one thing to bow out. I'll be doggone if I'm going to concede to hey, he got it. And endorse him? What you look like? No. But that's your call, president. So Max McMillan wants to know, do you support DC statehood and statehood for our territories? I'm thinking about Puerto Rico and what you said the other night, Howie, about which is my own feeling too. That's up, at least with Puerto Rico, that's a decision for the folks who are citizens of Puerto Rico to decide whether, and I know that's been a back and forth that they've been having for a very long time. Some people favor statehood, some people don't favor statehood. That, at least with Puerto Rico, like for my feelings about that, that's up to them.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is self-determination for the territories. DC should be a state. I mean, they're right in the middle of the United States. They got electoral votes, but they don't have voting representation in Congress and the Senate. And they should. That's clear. And we got an affiliate of the National Green Party called the DC Statehood Green Party. And I've been in independence long enough to be affiliated through the People's Party with the DC Statehood Party back in 1972 and 76. And they merged when the Green Party came along, became the DC Statehood Green Party. So we're clear on that. And you're right. It's up to the Puerto Ricans to determine what form of relationship to the United States they want. And I think the same thing goes for every territory. Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, the Marianas Islands. Who am I leaving out? Probably somebody. There are a number of territories, but their relationship to the United States should be their decision. And when they make a clear decision that's regarded as legitimate by their people, we should respect that. The problem with Puerto Rico is that they've had like 5 referendums, and none of the way they've been formulated has been satisfactory to all sides. And I've heard criticism. They're voting in November again on statehood. And statehood's been getting the most votes, but the independence movement has boycotted those elections, as has, I think, the last referendum, the people that want to keep the status quo, the Commonwealth status. Is it Commonwealth or associated status, whatever the current status is called. So they need, when they have a legitimate referendum that people regard as legitimate, we should respect that decision. Stephanie Green, do you have any plans or policies to help those struggling with their mental health? Well, yeah, the Medicare for All as a community-controlled national health service should cover mental health. And so that should be available free at the point of service. It's paid for through the public, budget, progressive taxation. And that is an integral part of health. And, I'm no mental health expert, but I will say that I keep seeing, and when I read the papers and different things, that, about a quarter of us have episodes where we need, help with mental health. So that's a big issue. And particularly in these stressful times, which makes it harder to keep your sense of what's going on around you, I guess, and your emotional stability. So these are important services, and they should be covered, just like, dealing with infectious diseases or broken bones or other things you may need to go to a doctor for. Your mental health is linked to your physical health. So that's crucial, and shouldn't be seen as a frill. Or we also got to change the culture. Particularly men are afraid to go for counseling when they need it because, they're macho. They don't supposed to need that. So they sometimes spin out of control when they, with a little help, they could be, back on track.
Yeah, and I just add to that I think that having it as a publicly funded, widely available service that is accessible the same way all other health services are, goes a long way to destigmatize it.
Arc Christelle asks, are you guys going to be out there on the ground with the protesters? Would you be interested in setting funds to provide protective gear? Yes and yes. In fact, you know, people in my campaign all over the country have been out there. And in terms of funds for protective gear, I assume you're saying, would we help provide funds for the protective gear for the demonstrators? And yes, our little campaign cannot provide protective gear for all the people in the United States. That's what the government should be doing, or making sure happens. And we will, you know, scream from the rooftops to the extent we can get attention that that is something should have been done right away. You know, the Defense Production Act should have been used to line up the supply chains, to get the stuff produced and distributed to where it was needed. And, you know, that's something the military can do, logistics. That's something, you know, company I used to work for, UPS, can do, logistics. And Trump, you know, like I was hearing, I guess yesterday, you know, his whole thing about testing was, oh, CVS will do it, Target will do it, you know, these stores, and they all did it, token them out. I mean, there are handfuls of these testing sites from these corporations, and it's a gesture. And he didn't give any guidelines or instructions. He just said, you do it. And then he went to us and said, they'll do it, and they're going to do it, and it's going to be great. And it isn't. So that's a case where personal protective equipment should have been produced and distributed a long time ago. And we should keep demanding that.
I see also where they're asking, Art Costella's asking in the comment in the chat, if you guys set a donation fund for protective gear, I'll happily donate. I think one of the things that those of us who cannot, because I'm still working, what I have not been able to do is get in the streets here. What I've done is independently support funds, you know, where people are, orgs that are run by people of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks, folks of color, who are doing the provisioning for their community. So if you are in a particular community and you want to help, I believe in starting local. It's just me, but I believe in starting local where you are, who needs that help from you.
Yeah, I would say local with respect to these demonstrations. I mean, there are a lot of people pontificating on social media, op-ed pages and whatnot, about what the government can do about the police brutality. But like I said at the beginning, we need a sustained movement. It's got to be about changing who controls the police, not the police themselves, but the people, through community control of the police, elected police commissions with real power. And that's where we need to build relationships, get involved in these protests, you know, work with the leadership that has called them, make sure they know who you are. And when it comes to the point where you've been around long enough that when they're thinking about what they're going to do, they're going to ask you what you think, then you know you can bring your stuff forward and, you know, they'll respect your opinion. You know, I often tell Greens, you know, we have an inclination as activists to write up a leaflet and hand it out and preach. And there's a place for that when you're mobilizing for a demonstration. But if you want to build a movement, you got to go out and listen and build relationships. And when people know who you are and know you can be trusted, that's going to help us not just in the immediate movements, but as we get stronger as a Green Party, as an independent left, we're going to be attacked. I mean, you know, my campaign's had a lot of stupid stuff said about it, but that's nothing compared to what the Democrats and the corporate media can throw at us, and they will. And our best defense against that is if the people on the ground know who we are and trust us and know that what they're hearing is propaganda, and because they know better, because they know who we are. So that's my advice in terms of this immediate movement is get involved and be there consistently, get to know people, build relationships, and stick with it. Because, you know, these things, the energy is really strong right now. And the police reaction, you know, there's a lot of stupid violence on the side, burnings, and we're not even sure who's doing that, the arson. throwing stuff at the police, trying to start fights. And my observation is a lot of them are young white men who are being told by the leaders of these demonstrations, that's not what we're here for, but they do it anyway. But after this energy dissipates, the problem will remain, and the hardcore of the movement will keep working. And if you're still there at that point, you're going to be a valued member of the movement, and you're needed. So we got to wrap up. It's been an hour. I've appreciated the opportunity to answer people. I wish I'd been able to get one of them young kids here to talk to you, but it's just a little bit too late. So, any last words for folks, Angela?
Happy Pride. I meant to say it at the beginning. Happy Pride Month. Juneteenth Day is coming up. So all of y'all who celebrate, happy Juneteenth. Wash your little hands. Mask up if you're going to be out. If you're marching, stay safe. If you're not marching, stay safe.
And we'll be back here, I assume, next Tuesday, answering more questions. We will have the unemployment report on Friday. It's going to be the highest unemployment we've had probably since the Great Depression, probably exceed that, if not in the official Bureau of Labor Statistic U3 number, almost certainly the U6 number. And then we have the National Jobs for All Coalition, which counts everybody looking for work, discouraged workers, people working part-time, wanting full-time. And they were already, I think, at 26% this month. So that's what we want to talk about some next Tuesday. We'll see how the news develops with this uprising we're seeing right now. But that's definitely one topic we want to cover, because the economy is flat on its back. Consumers are, a lot of people have lost money. They're holding on to money they got. They're not spending except on essentials. So business isn't investing. And if these two major parties continue their dogmatic faith in private enterprise alone to get us out of it, we're going to be in a depression until the election anyway. And that's something we want to talk about next Tuesday. So thanks for being here. And I enjoyed the exchange. Good night.
Good night, y'all.